It was an ordinary Tuesday morning when Ace Frehley walked into Vintage Vinyl on Bleecker Street, wearing faded jeans and a plain black hoodie. No silver makeup, no platform boots. Nothing that would make anyone recognize the man who once set stages on fire as Kiss's Space Ace. What he saw in that display case made him stop mid-step. His own signature, scrawled across a solo album cover, being sold for more money than most New York families earned in a week. The store owner had absolutely no idea who was about to walk through that door. New York City in the fall of 2015 was crisp and golden. Ace had been wandering through his old Greenwich Village haunts, feeling nostalgic for the days before fame, before the makeup, before everything got so complicated. He was dressed like any other aging rocker trying to stay anonymous. Hoodie pulled up, sunglasses on despite the overcast sky, scuffed sneakers that had seen better days. No jewelry except for a simple watch. Nothing flashy. Before we dive deeper into this incredible story, make sure to hit that subscribe button. You won't believe what happens next. Something made him stop that morning outside Vintage Vinyl. Maybe it was the Gibson Les Paul guitar in the window display, or maybe the faded Kiss posters plastered near the entrance, relics from an era that felt like both yesterday and a lifetime ago. As Ace approached the storefront window, his eyes landed on it. There, in a locked glass case positioned right at eye level, was a copy of his 1978 solo album. The one with his face on the cover, young and defiant, still believing the world was his for the taking. But it wasn't the album itself that made his breath catch. It was the signature slashed across the cover in silver marker, his signature, and beneath it, a small typed card with a price that made something twist in his chest. $750 in 2015 was serious money. It was rent for a decent apartment in parts of the city. It was more than his father had made in a month back in the Bronx, when Ace was learning to play guitar on a beat-up acoustic. And here it was, his own handwriting, being sold like some precious artifact behind locked glass. Ace stood there for a long moment, just staring. He remembered signing thousands of albums over the years, so many faces blurring together in a haze of tour buses and hotel rooms and backstage areas that all looked the same. The late 70s had been a whirlwind of makeup and pyrotechnics and screaming crowds. He'd signed autographs until his hand cramped, smiled until his face hurt, played the character of Space Ace until he sometimes forgot who Paul Daniel Frehley actually was underneath all that silver paint. But something about seeing his own signature displayed like this, commodified and priced, made him feel strange. Not angry exactly, more like curious, disconnected, like he was looking at evidence of someone else's life. The bell above the door chimed as Ace stepped inside. The shop smelled like old vinyl and incense. Walls covered floor to ceiling with album covers and vintage concert posters. Behind the counter sat a man in his early 50s with a graying ponytail and reading glasses perched on his nose. He glanced up briefly from his laptop, nodded a casual greeting, and went back to whatever he was doing. Ace wandered through the aisles, fingers trailing along album spines, letting muscle memory guide him toward the rock section. He found himself gravitating back toward that locked display case, the one with his younger self staring out from behind glass. "See something that catches your eye?" the owner called out, not looking up from his screen. Ace pointed at the case. "That Ace Frehley solo album, the signed one. Where'd you get it?" The owner stood, keys jangling on his belt, and walked over with the careful gait of someone who'd spent decades on his feet in record stores. He looked proud as he approached the case. That right there is the crown jewel of my collection, he said, unlocking the glass door with practiced ease. Genuine Ace Frehley signature, authenticated by a professional appraiser. Got it from an estate sale in Connecticut about 6 months ago. The second I saw this baby, I knew it was something special. He reached for the album, but didn't quite hand it over yet, holding it at an angle so Ace could see but not touch. Careful with this one. It's worth more than most of the guitars hanging on that wall. $750. And honestly, that's a bargain. I've got a collector in Tokyo who's offered me 800 sight unseen. The owner admired the album like it was a painting in a museum. Signed in 1978, right around the time all 4 KISS members released solo albums on the same day. That was a marketing masterstroke, you know. Revolutionary for the music industry. This is pure rock and roll history right here. Ace studied his own signature through the protective plastic sleeve. The silver marker had faded slightly over the decades, but it was unmistakably his handwriting, that distinctive scrawl he'd developed because signing fast was a survival skill when you had 200 fans waiting in line. "You a KISS fan?" the owner asked, adjusting his glasses to look at Ace more closely, though still not really seeing him. "You could say that," Ace replied quietly, not looking up from the album. "Yeah, me too. Well, I mean, I was more into the early stuff, you know? Before they took the makeup off and it all got kind of corporate. Those first few albums, Alive, Destroyer, that was real rock and roll, man. Raw energy. And Ace Frehley, he was the cool one, the mysterious one. That whole Space Ace persona, the smoking guitar, the silver makeup, pure genius." The owner paused, warming to his subject. "Though between you and me, I always thought Ace got a raw deal in that band. Gene and Paul, they were the businessmen, the showmen. Peter and Ace, they were the real musicians. The soul of the band, you know? But the business side always wins in the end." Ace nodded slowly, still examining the album. "You ever wonder who Ace signed this for originally? Why they wanted his autograph?" The owner shrugged. "Could have been anybody. Ace probably signed 10,000 of these things back in the day. They all blur together when you're that famous, right? Sign, smile, move on to the next person. It's just part of the machine. I doubt any individual signing meant much to him personally." "Maybe," Ace said quietly, something unreadable in his voice. "Or maybe some of them meant more than you'd think." The owner laughed, a knowing sound. "You're a romantic, huh?" "Nah, man. When you're at that level of fame, signing hundreds of autographs a day, they all become meaningless. Trust me, Ace Frehley wasn't sitting there contemplating the deep philosophical meaning of each signature. He was probably half drunk and thinking about the next gig." Ace felt something tighten in his chest, but kept his expression neutral. He handed the album back carefully. "How much would you really take for it?" The owner's eyes narrowed slightly as he looked Ace up and down, taking in the worn hoodie, the casual appearance, the absence of any obvious wealth. "Like I said, $750. But honestly, buddy, no offense, but I'm not sure this is really in your price range. I've got serious collectors with serious money interested in this piece. This isn't some garage sale find we're talking about." "What if I really wanted it?" Ace pressed, keeping his voice even. "Then you'd need to come back with $750 cash," the owner said, placing the album back in the case and locking it with a decisive click. "Plus, I'd need some assurance you're not just going to turn around and damage it or try to flip it. This is a serious collector's item, museum quality. These things need to go to people who understand their value." Ace smiled, but there was something melancholy in it. What if I told you I could get it for free? The owner actually laughed out loud at that. Yeah, and I'm Peter Criss. Look, man, I get it. Kiss memorabilia is expensive, but that's because it's valuable. Supply and demand, basic economics, not everybody can afford the premium stuff. Maybe check out the bargain bins over there. Lots of good music for 10, 15 bucks. I'm serious, Ace said, his voice taking on a different quality now, something harder underneath the casual tone. I've never paid for one of these signatures. Never have, never will. The owner's expression shifted from amused to irritated. All right, buddy. I don't know what kind of game you're playing here, but if you're not buying anything, I've got inventory to process. I'm running a business, not a museum where you can just stand around and dream. Ace reached into his back pocket slowly and pulled out his wallet, worn leather that had been with him for years. The owner watched with crossed arms, clearly expecting him to either prove he had the money or embarrass himself trying. Instead, Ace pulled out his driver's license and placed it on the counter right next to where the owner was standing, right under the fluorescent light. Take a look, Ace said quietly. The owner glanced at the license, then froze. His eyes went wide. He looked at the ID, then at Ace's face, then back at the ID. His mouth opened slightly. No way, he whispered. You're actually him. Ace pulled down his hood and took off his sunglasses. Without the makeup, without the costume, he was just a man in his 60s with tired eyes and the kind of face that had seen too much of everything. But those features, that distinctive bone structure, it was unmistakable once you knew what you were looking at. Oh my God, the owner breathed. I just told Ace Frehley he couldn't afford his own signature. His face went from pale to flushed. I'm so sorry, Mr. Frehley. I had no idea. Obviously I had no idea, but I said all those things about you being drunk and the signatures not meaning anything and… Hey, Ace said, his voice gentle but firm. It's all right. You didn't know. That's kind of the whole point of dressing like this, you know? Sometimes I just want to walk around and be a regular person. See how the world looks from the other side. But I implied you were. I basically said you didn't care about your fans, that you were just going through the motions. The owner looked like he might actually be sick. I've been a Kiss fan since 1975. I saw you guys at Madison Square Garden in '77. You were my hero, man. And Ace picked up his license and slid it back into his wallet. You know what? You weren't completely wrong about some of it. The machine does take over sometimes. And yeah, when you're signing hundreds of autographs in a row, they do start to blur together. That's just the reality of that kind of fame. He paused, looking back at the locked case. But not all of them blur. Not this one. The owner's voice was barely above a whisper. You remember this specific album? I do now, Ace said, and something in his eyes went distant, traveling back through decades. That signature right there. I signed that in 1978, but it wasn't at some big public event or record store appearance. It was after a show in Buffalo, New York. Middle of winter, freezing cold, snow coming down so hard you could barely see. Ace moved closer to the case, looking at his younger self on that album cover. Most people had cleared out because of the weather, but there was this kid waiting by the tour bus. Couldn't have been more than 17, 18 maybe. He was shivering in this thin denim jacket, completely soaked through, holding this album inside a plastic bag to keep it dry. The owner was completely still now, hanging on every word. When I came out, I was the last one, always liked to take my time getting the makeup off. This kid just stood there in the snow. He didn't scream or jump around like fans usually did. He just looked at me with these intense eyes and said, "Mr. Frehley, I drove 4 hours to see you play tonight. Your guitar solo in Shock Me changed my life. Would you sign this? I'm starting a band, and I want to remember this moment forever." Ace's voice got quieter, more reflective. I remember his hands were shaking when he handed me the album. Could have been the cold, could have been nerves, probably both. I asked him what kind of music his band played, and he said, "Space rock, because of you." We talked for maybe 10 minutes right there in the snow. I signed his album, wrote something on it about keeping the music alive. He told me his name was David, and that seeing me play that night made him believe he could actually do this, actually make it as a musician. The owner's eyes were glistening. Did you ever hear from him again?" Ace shook his head slowly. "Never. But I think about him sometimes, especially when I see albums like this one. I wonder if he made it, if his band ever got off the ground. I wonder if that moment in the snow meant as much to him over the years as it's meant to me." He smiled sadly. "That's the strange thing about being in a band like Kiss. You touch thousands of lives, become part of people's stories, but you almost never get to see how those stories end. You just hope you made some kind of difference." There was a long silence in the shop. Outside, taxis honked on Bleecker Street. People hurried past with coffee cups and briefcases, completely unaware of what was happening in this small record store. Finally, the owner spoke, his voice thick. Do you want to buy it? The album? I'll give it to you, of course. I couldn't possibly charge you for your own signature. That would be insane." Ace shook his head. "No, you keep it. Sell it to that collector in Tokyo if you want. Get your $800. That album's done its job already. It meant something to David back in 1978, and now it's got its own life, its own value. That's okay." He pulled a silver marker from the display counter, one the store probably used for signing events. "But maybe you've got another copy of that album somewhere in here? Something I could sign fresh?" The owner practically sprinted to the back room and returned moments later with 3 different Ace Frehley solo albums, his hands shaking so badly he almost dropped them. "These, sir. Any of these. All of these. Whatever you want. It would be an honor." Ace took his time with each one, signing them carefully, adding personal messages and the date. On the first, "Keep the Space Rock Alive, Ace Frehley, Bleecker Saint, Oct. 2015. On the second, "The Best Things in Music Can't Be Bought, AF 10/2015. On the third, "The real value isn't in the signature, it's in the song you haven't written yet, Space Ace." When he finished, he handed them back. 3 more, pieces of history for your collection. Do with them what you want, but maybe the stories matter more than the price tags. The owner was crying now, not even trying to hide it. "Mr. Frehley, I don't know what to say. Thank you. Thank you so much. And I'm sorry for everything I said, for assuming—" "Stop apologizing," Ace said, putting a hand on the man's shoulder. "You were doing your job, protecting something you thought was valuable. That shows you care about what you do. That's good." He paused. "Besides, you gave me something today, too." "I did. What?" "You reminded me why those signatures mattered in the first place. Not because they'd be worth money someday, but because in that moment, standing in the snow with a kid named David, it was a connection. Human to human, musician to musician. That's worth more than $750 any day of the week." Ace started toward the door, then paused and turned back. "And hey, For what it's worth, you weren't wrong about the business side winning. Gene and Paul, they knew how to run an empire. But Peter and I, we knew how to make music that meant something. Both things have value. Both things matter. Took me a long time to understand that. The owner stood behind the counter, holding those 3 albums like they were made of precious crystal, tears still streaming down his face. "Mr. Frehley, can I ask you one more thing?" "Sure." "That kid David, the one from Buffalo, do you really think he made it? Do you think he's out there somewhere playing space rock because of that night?" Ace smiled, and for a moment, the weariness lifted from his face. "I don't know, but I hope so. And even if he's not famous, even if he's just playing in his garage for himself, then that moment still mattered. We still connected. The music still lived. That's what it's all about, really." After Ace left, the owner stood in that empty shop for nearly 2 hours, just staring at those 3 signed albums. He never did sell them. Instead, he built a special display case on the wall behind the counter, climate-controlled and protected, where they stayed for the next 8 years until he retired. And every single time someone asked about them, he told this story, word for word, about the day Ace Frehley walked into his shop and taught him that the real value of rock and roll isn't measured in dollars. As for the original album, the one in the locked case, the collector from Tokyo did eventually buy it for $800. But before it shipped, the owner did something he knew Ace would appreciate. He wrote down the entire story, the real story about David in the snow in Buffalo, about second chances and human connections, and he included it with the album in a sealed envelope marked "The Story Behind the Signature." Because Ace had been right. Stories should travel with the objects. They're what transform memorabilia into meaning, signatures into souls, and commerce into connection. To this day, vintage vinyl still exists on Bleecker Street, now run by the original owner's son. And if you ask him about the 3 Ace Frehley albums hanging behind the counter in that special case, he'll tell you this story. Not about the one worth $800 that's now in Tokyo, but about the 3 that are absolutely priceless. Because they came with a lesson about humility, authenticity, and the human heart that beats underneath every rock and roll legend. Ace Frehley walked out of that record store the same way he walked in, quietly, anonymously, just another person on the streets of Greenwich Village. But he left behind something more valuable than any signed album, any platinum record, any sold-out arena show. He left behind a reminder that the most important autographs we give in life aren't written in silver marker on album covers. They're written in the moments we choose to connect, to be vulnerable, to remember that before we're legends or commodities or display cases behind glass, we're human beings whose greatest gift is the ability to touch another person's life, even if it's just for 10 minutes in the snow outside a tour bus in Buffalo, talking about space rock with a kid whose name was David.